This is Indian Country Today.
Esquili Gata. Thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Here are the headlines for Wednesday, November 18th. President-elect Joe Biden's transition team is vetting New Mexico Representative Deb Haaland for a cabinet post. According to The Hill, Haaland is being considered for Interior Secretary. The development came after she abruptly dropped out of the race for House Democratic Caucus Vice Chairwoman. If tapped by Biden, Haaland's nomination would be historic. It would make her the first Native American cabinet secretary overseeing an agency with vast responsibility over tribes and public lands. In California, authorities are investigating threatening letters sent to a Native American museum. Last month, the Marin Museum of the American Indian in Novato, California, received the suspicious letters. They contained the words smallpox and anthrax on the envelopes. The Postal Service and Novato police are investigating because it's a federal crime to use the Postal Service to carry out threats. The letter's reference to smallpox and its dispatch to a Native American museum is racist because of its historical reference. Smallpox was used in biological warfare against Native Americans, wiping out whole tribes and leaving others devastated. A museum spokesperson says the letters came after protesters tore down a statue of Junipero Serra at a local mission last month. The mission has no direct ties to the museum. Serra was a Spanish missionary who was recently made a saint by the Catholic Church. However, Native Americans say he mistreated natives by making them slaves and forcing them to convert to Christianity. Race relations in Rapid City, South Dakota have not always been smooth, but as Stuart Huntington reports, on Monday, the city opened the doors of conciliation. They have committed to resolve a decades-old land claim championed by generations of Lakota elders.
Since the 1950s, Lakota elders have cried foul. 1,200 acres of Indian boarding school land fell into many hands, but not Native hands. That might change after Monday's City Council vote to address tightly argued legal claims on 3 small parcels.
So many of our community members have felt pushed aside. So for our City Council to come together tonight and want to move forward with us, this is momentous and inspiring.
By a 9-1 margin, the council set a June 30th deadline for negotiators to craft a plan to exchange land for the 3 properties in question. Other goals include establishing an urban Indian center and capitalizing a Native Community Development Corporation.
It's a small step, but it's a giant leap in terms of fulfilling the prophecy and the history of our people, in terms of what belongs to us, and in terms of reconciliation with the non-Indian community.
The move was hailed as historic locally.
I've been here all my life, so 60 plus years I've been here. And this is the first time I've really seen a step forward like this with the American Indian community.
And also for the Indians of Fort Laramie Treaty Territory who have seen their land shrivel since 1851.
This is kind of the history of Indian land 101, is that it's taking and then it's another taking and then yet another taking. And I mean, there are other areas of the country where we've seen both city governments and county governments and state governments return land, but not in that treaty area, no.
But today, at least, it seems the pendulum might finally be swinging the other way.
We are really pleased with our City Council members wanting to move forward to find ways for our entire community to progress and heal.
In Rapid City, Stuart Huntington, Indian Country Today.
Rapid City Indian Boarding School project managers will start immediately on the tasks ahead. First up, selecting team members to represent the group on the city's task force. The state of Minnesota is granting the Prairie Island Dakota Indian community $46 million for a net zero emissions project. In May, the state legislature approved the project as part of a solar energy production incentive bill. The funding comes from an agreement that allows one of the state's major utilities to store nuclear waste on the island. With the tribe's relatively small footprint, Energy News Network reports the project is estimated to be completed within 3 years. And those are the headlines from Indian Country Today for Wednesday, November 18th. I'm Patty Thalahungva. When we come back, an animal shelter burns down on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. We'll hear about the efforts to rebuild. In 2014, Calvin Red Owl started an animal shelter on his reservation in South Dakota. He named it White Owl Sanctuary, and it's the first and only animal shelter on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. Through the years, he's taken in dogs, cats, horses, and even raccoons. Well, recently, his shelter burned down, and that's left him caring for 49 animals in his own home where he lives with his 3 sons. Calvin joins us now to tell us more about his animal shelter and the rebuilding effort he now faces. Welcome, Calvin.
Hello.
Well, thank you for joining us here. Tell us what made you decide to open your animal shelter?
Well, I was born and raised here on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and growing up all my life, seeing all the dogs and cats running around it, I always wanted to take in all the animals I could, but I wasn't able to. And now, since I'm older, I'm able to, and have my own house, I'm able to care for all the animals I can. But recently, last year we had got a trailer for our animal shelter, and that's what we've been housing them in all year. And on the 11th, it burned down. So now we have all the animals here at my residence.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about the fire in a minute here, but again, the background of your shelter, you're the first one on your reservation. You are a licensed facility. What animals are you licensed to care for?
Cats and dogs and horses.
All right. So, and res dogs are all over the reservation, on most reservations at least. And is that an issue that you wanted to address? Because quite often, they're not spayed or neutered, and they continue to have more puppies, which can cause an issue on reservations when it comes to safety. The dogs can become aggressive.
Yeah, one thing, we don't have animal control here on the Pine Ridge Reservation. And one thing that I tried to do was have a catch and release spay and neuter program where we catch and spay and neuter any cat and dog that we can get. And then before we send them back out, because oftentimes a lot of the animals are homeless and nobody's there to care for them the way they need to be to not have that problem here on the reservation.
So filling that void on your reservation, you've now been in business for 6 years. Some of the opportunities that you had there, you were actually employing people before the pandemic hit. Talk about the staff who worked with you there at the animal shelter.
Well, we had 2 workers, is what we called them. They cared for the animals. They fed and watered and cleaned all the cages. And whenever the coronavirus happened, it kind of set our funding off because we survived solely off of donations. And whenever the pandemic had happened, it threw all our donations off, and then we couldn't afford to keep them employed anymore. So now they do come back as volunteers, but it's not as often as we had hoped because of the whole pandemic.
Yeah, every business is being affected by this pandemic here. Now tell us about the fires, because you suspect arson. Why is that?
In the past week, it was the 3rd trailer to be burned down here on the reservation. One trailer wasn't lived in, it was used as storage, and another trailer was partially lived in. And my trailer here, that is what we housed the animals in. That was where our office was located, and everything was just lost in that fire. And the tribal authorities that I had spoken to the night of the fire they were trying to gather as much information as they could as to how the fire had started. But in the office space that the fire had started, it was completely cleaned out. There was nothing in there to have started the fire. So the reason why we assume arson is because of the few other trailers that had also burned up within the same week.
And have police made any headway in that investigation? Have they made any arrests?
There has not been any leads as far as I know.
And so what's next for you and your shelter?
Well, now what's next for the shelter is we're trying to find homes for all 47 animals that we have. And we are trying to rebuild as quickly as possible because the winter months are here and there are lots of animals that need rehoming here on the reservation. And a lot of times they come to the White Owl Sanctuary and spend 3 to 6 months of their life here while they're waiting for. We do have 3 dogs here who have been with us for the last 4 years who were never able to find a home. So one thing that I'd like to try to accomplish is provide permanent shelter for the animals that we cannot provide homes for.
Wow. And have people been coming forward to adopt these animals? Or are you just now starting the process since the fire for these animals that you now have? And I understand you also ended up with about 12 more puppies in this whole process.
Yeah, we actually just started trying yesterday to start adopting the dogs out. I reached out to a few other nonprofit rescues to try to get as much animals placed out as we can. So right now I'm currently waiting back to hear from them.
Okay. And are you a non-kill shelter, meaning the animals that you have will stay with you until they get adopted out, or just stay there? Like you said, the dogs are there. Some dogs have been there for 4 years.
The whole point of the animal shelter when I had first begun was to provide a place for all dogs and cats and horses to come to live their life here and without worry. So that's kind of where I still stand, but we do need help getting our animals placed into homes until we can rebuild.
All right. And when you're looking at whether it's another organization or actual people to adopt the animals, can they adopt just within the state, or can people from out of state adopt these animals?
We encourage anyone who can, because all their current animals are vetted and have the right paperwork to cross state lines. So there'd be no problem there. Right now we are currently waiving our $35 adoption fee to help encourage people to adopt more animals from us.
All right. And do you have anything else you want to tell us about your animal shelter? Again, you've been in operation now for 6 years. And I'm curious a little bit about the raccoons. How did you end up getting raccoons?
One day I had one of my grandfathers, he had called me and asked me if he found a baby raccoon and he would like to find it a home. And that was the first raccoon that I'd ever encountered here on the reservation. And he had found him walking down along the creek, just a little baby raccoon all by himself. So he picked up the raccoon and we actually ended up raising him here for about 2 years before we found an adopter.
Wow. So, and are your sons also now a part of this effort to take care of the animals?
Yeah, I call them my future rescuers because they're really involved with what I'm doing. And they really love to care for the puppies and the kitties.
All right. So again, the only shelter there, and I'm wondering if you're getting any kind of assistance from the tribe itself as you continue to care for these animals.
I had reached out to the local district authority here in the Medicine Root District on Pine Ridge, and they had told me that they do not have much assistance to offer, but to fill out a request and they'll do what they can. So
all right.
I've been waiting for a response on the request.
All right. Well, we're hearing your little kitty cats meowing in the background, and haven't heard any dogs, I don't think, but you can definitely tell that you've got a house full of animals there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Calvin, really appreciate you being here. Calvin Red Owl, who owns and operates his own animal shelter on his reservation. Thanks for joining us and telling us about your animal sanctuary, and the best to you as you rebuild.
Thank you.
And when we come back, we'll talk with Joaqlin Estus about the rise in COVID cases in Alaska. As the nation sees a rise in COVID-19 cases, there are new worries about how the upcoming holidays may spread the virus even more as people insist on traveling and getting together for holiday dinners. Joaqlin Estus is our national correspondent based in Anchorage, and she joins us to talk about the situation there in Alaska. Welcome, Joaqlin.
Hi.
Well, you know, COVID is just raging across the country, and now looking at Alaska, the situation there in the last few weeks has really gotten pretty bad. Tell us about what's happening there.
So Alaska is a little bit cut off from, well, we're completely cut off from the rest of the country geographically. So COVID came late to Alaska, and the numbers crept up pretty slowly. We still have less than half the rate of North Dakota, but that's a really, excuse me, good thing, because Alaska also has fewer hospitals, doctors, nurses, specialists, that kind of thing, than a lot of states. What's going on right now is the rate has been rising for 6 weeks, and it jumped 18% on Monday. And those new cases in another week or two, as the disease progresses, some of those people are going to be going to the ER and needing help. So the area in the state that's hardest hit is Southwest Alaska, an area about the size of Oregon. It's 85% Yupik and Athabascan. There's one hospital in the Yukon-Kuskokwim region. It has five high-flow oxygen machines and 4 ventilators. So they could care for 9 people in respiratory distress, except they don't have quite enough staff. And so they can only handle 7 people. Because somebody who's put on a ventilator basically needs 24-hour one-on-one care, pretty much. So the health professionals, I think everybody's seen this around the world, basically, are begging the public to take this seriously and to wear masks. And that's because they see what's coming. And what's coming is a shortage of beds, equipment, staff, and facilities. And what that means is not everybody who needs expert care and sophisticated life-saving equipment is going to get it. Health professionals will have to do what they really do not want to do, and that is make life and death decisions on who gets the medical evacuation, the ventilator, the expert care. So what people are doing is, I think probably every state has guidelines for times of what they call resource scarcity. And basically, if you have 2 people who both need to be on a ventilator or whatever, the guidelines tell care providers how to make the decision about who gets it. And the main criteria have to do with the likelihood of survival. So, and here's something I noticed, it kind of leapt out at me. The guidelines tell care providers to leave judgments about patients' quality of life or relative social value completely out of the decision making about who gets those scarce resources. And the thing is, you know, this it sort of makes sense, but then you think about the person who's actually having to make the decision. And somebody who goes into healthcare, they do it because they care about people, they want to help people heal, that kind of thing. So I imagine it would be hard for anybody, but especially for somebody in the health field, to make a decision that somebody is not going to get the recommended level of care.
And Joaqlin, you know, we've seen that across the country already. We saw that in California, we saw that in New York, we saw that in Washington State, where medical workers had to make that decision. It was in their hands to decide which patient got, you know, certain levels of care. And that's got to be just a gut-wrenching moment to just make that decision and decide, you know, who's going to get help and who possibly could recover. Yeah, so we've seen it across the country already, and also in other parts of the world. When it comes to this virus here, we've been watching this and covering the story. You've been on it from you know, the very beginning about how important, you know, the outlying villages were setting up their own areas where they really wanted people to stay away, because again, Alaska Natives have had in their history this devastation of a pandemic coming in and wiping out an entire village. So remind our viewers about that, because again, these outlying villages really tried to put the word out. Don't come in here, don't bring the virus in here, because we're isolated, because we're so far away from, you know, major cities with medical care that are also limited. Talk a little bit about that history again.
Yeah, well, Alaska, like all of Indian country, has experienced terrible epidemics, including the flu of 1918, but the measles, smallpox, what are the other contagious diseases? Anyway, well, tuberculosis was huge in Alaska, and in some cases, whole villages died out. And the memory of that is still in people's minds, especially in Bristol Bay, where I'm not sure what the numbers were, but they were particularly hard hit in 1918. So what villages did when they first heard about COVID is they told people to stay away and said, don't come here unless you live here and it's absolutely essential. And if you do live here, don't leave unless it's absolutely essential. Well, what happens is places, you know, larger towns are going to have traffic from outside of their boundaries. And then what happens in some of the smaller villages is somebody leaves and they don't know it, but they're carrying the infection and they come back. And because there have been 0 cases, people have not been practicing social distancing to the degree that people have in other places. So, you know, keeping the doors closed has been great until somebody gets inside the village and they have the infection. So, and then it spreads like wildfire. So what happened last week is the governor sent out a red alert. I mean, the whole state is on red alert, and the governor sent out a text to everyone's cell phone, which it was kind of interesting because all of a sudden these questions kept popping up. Is there an earthquake? What's going on? And because it's usually used for natural disasters. But everybody got this, a link to a videotape. And the governor basically said, please do whatever it takes to not get COVID or give it to somebody else for a couple of weeks because the hospitals can't handle it. So Alaskans we like to see ourselves as really tough, independent people. I think we do pretty well with wearing masks and keeping social distancing, but I go places and I do see people not practicing taking those precautions. And so we'll see if people are so obsessed with proving that they're tough and independent, manly, whatever, that they won't take precautions, or if they'll do what it takes to keep themselves and the people around them out of the emergency room.
Well, Joaqlin, does Alaska has the governor issued a mask mandate? Is he requiring everyone to wear a mask?
No, he's had Well, he put the state, he declared an emergency, but mostly what that means is it opens the door for federal aid. And he has not issued a mask mandate. And to tell you the truth, I think it's because there are a lot of people who seem to be taking this as a challenge. It's like, you're not the boss of me, so if somebody tells them to wear a mask, they get, it puts them on, and they refuse to do it.
That's such an interesting situation, and in looking at human behavior. In Arizona, the mayors of all the cities are starting to call on the governor to declare, a statewide mandate in Arizona, because they're so tired of people saying they don't need to wear this, even though mayors have said in their cities they must wear masks. Joaqlin Estus, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Thalahungva. Join us again tomorrow.
You got to take a stand just because you know you can. Oh, you got to run, you got to run.
Indian Country Today is recorded at the Phoenix Indian School Visitor Center in Phoenix, Arizona.
This is Indian Country Today.